There's a kind of pain almost every guy is scared of, but barely anybody talks about it. The moment the money dries up, life gets shaky, and suddenly the whole vibe around you changes. The texts feel colder, the looks feel different, even the silence hits harder. She left when you lost money. But what does that really mean? Was it actually about the money? Or was something deeper falling apart the whole time? Because sometimes, she left when you lost money becomes the wake-up call that completely changes the way a man sees love, loyalty, respect, and even himself. And if you're the kind of man trying to become stronger, wiser, and harder to break in today's world, hit that subscribe button right now. This channel was made for men who want real conversations and real growth. And we're getting close to our goal of 1,000 subscribers. Be here before everybody else catches on. Topic 1. The day everything changed without warning. There's a moment most men never forget, not because it was loud, but because it was quiet. The kind of silence that somehow feels heavier than a fight. One day she laughed differently, texted differently, looked at him differently, and deep down, before he could even explain it, he felt it in his gut. Something was off. Funny thing is, it usually doesn't start with a breakup. It starts with emotional distance hiding inside normal everyday moments. A lot of guys think women leave overnight, but most of the time that's not how it goes. The emotional checkout usually starts way before the physical one. It shows up in little things that seem harmless at first. She stops asking how his day was, stops touching his arm while talking, stops lighting up when he walks through the door. And here's the dangerous part. Most men ignore those signs because they're too busy trying to fix the money situation, not realizing another problem is quietly growing right beside it. One guy described it perfectly once. He said, "It felt like I lost my job, and then slowly lost the feeling of home too." That hits hard because a lot of men know exactly what that feels like, especially in a world where a man's value is constantly tied to success, status, and money. When the income disappears, something inside him starts questioning his own worth, and without even noticing it, he starts changing too. His energy, his confidence, the way he carries himself, even the way he talks. And that invisible shift is where the next part of this story really begins. Topic 2. Why men attach their identity to money. Most men were never directly told, your value depends on money, but they learned it anyway. They learned it by watching how people treat successful men compared to struggling men. A man with money gets called ambitious, respected, attractive, driven. A man without it. Suddenly people look at him with pity. Or worse, disappointment. And after hearing those messages for years, a lot of men stop seeing money as a tool and start seeing it as proof they matter. That's why financial loss hits men differently. It's usually not just about bills or lifestyle changes. It feels personal, almost like losing part of who they are. A guy can go from feeling confident and admired to staring at himself in the bathroom mirror at 2 a.m., wondering if people still respect him the same way, wondering if his girl still sees him as that guy. And the scary part is this. When a man loses his sense of purpose, people feel the shift before he even says a word. Once you notice it, you start seeing it everywhere. Some men stop going out after money problems hit. Others isolate themselves, avoid friends and family, or completely shut down emotionally. Not because they're weak, but because a lot of them were raised believing they always had to be the provider, the fixer, the rock. Nobody really taught them what to do when life punches them in the face, and suddenly they're the ones who need support. And that silent battle inside often creates the exact emotional shift relationships struggle to survive. Topic 3. The silent shift in female attraction. One of the hardest truths for a lot of men to accept is that attraction is emotional, and emotions are always moving. Most women don't wake up one day and randomly decide to stop loving a man because he lost money. Usually it's way more subtle than that. What changes first is the feeling around him. The emotional safety, the certainty, the energy he brings into a room. And when that emotional atmosphere changes, attraction can quietly start changing too. This is where a lot of guys completely misunderstand women. They think attraction is only about looks, status, or income. But honestly, women often respond more to emotional direction than financial numbers themselves. A man can lose money and still stay grounded, calm, focused, and emotionally solid. And many women will still feel deeply attracted to him. Meanwhile, another guy can still have money but become bitter, desperate, emotionally reactive, and negative all the time. And suddenly the attraction starts fading fast. People don't just react to situations, they react to energy. Think about two men dealing with the exact same crisis. One panics, complains nonstop, loses emotional control, and starts moving through life like defeat already owns him. The other says, "Yeah, this sucks, but I'll bounce back." Same situation, completely different energy, and that difference matters way more than most men realize. Because when a woman starts feeling hopelessness replacing leadership, uncertainty replacing calm, or emotional collapse replacing direction, something inside the relationship quietly starts shaking. And that's exactly why the next stage becomes so dangerous if a man doesn't understand what's really happening underneath the surface. Topic 4. She didn't leave because of the money alone. This is the part most men never hear clearly enough. Sometimes she didn't leave because the bank account changed. She left because the man she emotionally leaned on slowly started disappearing. The confidence faded. The emotional stability cracked. The direction disappeared. And without even realizing it, he stopped feeling emotionally safe to stand next to. That's a painful truth. But it's also an important one, because it changes everything about how a man sees the situation. A lot of guys think leadership only means paying bills or making good money. But real leadership in a relationship is emotional. It's about how a man handles pressure when life gets ugly. Think about a captain in the middle of a storm. Nobody expects him to magically stop the storm, but they do expect him to stay steady while navigating through it. The second he panics louder than everyone else on the ship, fear spreads fast. Relationships work the same way. Women usually pay less attention to what happens to a man, and more attention to how he handles what happens. One older businessman explained it perfectly after losing almost everything during a recession. He said, "My company failed in 6 months, but my marriage started failing the moment I stopped believing in myself." That line carries more truth than most people realize, because when a man loses his sense of direction, routines disappear, discipline weakens, emotional reactions increase, and eventually the entire energy around him changes. And once that emotional instability enters the relationship, it quietly opens the door to a much deeper psychological collapse most men never see coming. Topic 5. The dangerous psychological collapse. Most men hide. Most men never talk about what financial loss really does to them mentally. They joke about it, downplay it, say, "I'm good," with a fake smile, while inside they feel like they're drowning. That's because a lot of men were raised to believe vulnerability is dangerous. So instead of expressing pain, they bury it. They isolate. They get quieter, more irritated, less patient. And over time, the people around them stop feeling connected to them, even while living under the same roof. What makes this so dangerous is how invisible it can look from the outside. A man can still wake up, go to work, answer texts, and function normally while mentally falling apart in silence. He loses interest in hobbies, avoids eye contact, sleeps less, overthinks everything late at night. Even small problems start feeling way heavier than they should. Some men cope through drinking, distractions, gambling, or emotional numbness because it temporarily helps them escape the feeling of not being enough. But unresolved pain always leaks out somewhere eventually. And the worst part? A lot of men don't even realize how much their emotional state changes the energy of the relationship. Human beings naturally feel emotional tension, even when nobody says a word. A woman may start feeling emotionally disconnected without fully understanding why. Conversations get colder, intimacy changes, the house feels heavier, and when a man spends every day fighting battles inside his own mind, he often doesn't notice the relationship itself slowly slipping into survival mode too. which exposes something most couples are never really prepared for. Topic 6. When financial struggle reveals the true nature of a relationship. Hard times have a weird way of ripping masks off people. When life feels comfortable, almost any relationship can look healthy on the surface. Nice dinners, vacations, gifts, routines. All of it can create the illusion of a deep connection. But pressure changes everything. Financial struggle acts like emotional fire. It exposes patience, loyalty, selfishness, emotional maturity, and hidden expectations people didn't even realize they had. And sometimes, the version of someone you meet during success looks completely different once hardship shows up. A lot of men realize during financial loss that they weren't just providing money. They were providing emotional certainty, and once that certainty disappeared, the whole relationship dynamic started changing fast. Suddenly, arguments happen more often. Respect feels weaker. Support becomes conditional. Some women become colder, more critical, more emotionally distant. But here's the uncomfortable truth a lot of people avoid talking about. Hardship doesn't create character. It reveals it. Pressure simply exposes what was already there underneath the surface. At the same time, this moment can become one of the biggest emotional wake-up calls in a man's life. Because when everything external starts falling apart, he's finally forced to ask dangerous questions. Was she really in love with him? Or with the stability around him? Did the relationship have real emotional depth, or just emotional convenience? And maybe even harder, had he unknowingly built his entire identity around being useful instead of being genuinely valued? Those questions can either emotionally destroy a man or completely change the way he sees relationships forever. 7. The brutal truth about respect and masculine energy. There's something a lot of men eventually learn the hard way. Attraction might open the door to a relationship, but respect is usually what keeps it alive. And respect has very little to do with perfection. A man doesn't need to win every battle, make millions, or dominate every situation to be respected. But he does need emotional stability, self-respect, and the ability to stay grounded under pressure. The problem is, many men lose those things the second life starts hitting back, and the emotional dynamic changes before they even realize it. Masculine energy isn't about acting tough 24/7. Honestly, some of the strongest men stay calm precisely when everything around them turns chaotic. Think about the kind of men people naturally trust during a crisis. Usually they're not the loudest guys in the room. They're the ones who stay centered, focused, controlled. A woman can often tolerate financial struggle much longer than emotional instability, because when a man completely loses control of himself, the relationship stops feeling emotionally safe. And once respect starts fading, attraction usually follows right behind it. One man explained it perfectly after rebuilding his life from scratch. He said, "She didn't leave when I lost money. She left when I lost myself." That line carries a brutal truth a lot of men spend years trying to understand, because money problems are temporary a lot of the time. But when a man abandons his discipline, purpose, emotional control, ambition, and confidence, people around him start feeling the collapse emotionally. And weirdly enough, that painful realization often becomes the exact turning point where some men either break completely or start becoming far stronger than they ever were before. Topic 8. Why some women stay through the storm and others don't. One of the biggest mistakes men make after heartbreak is assuming all women react the same way to hardship. They don't. Some disappear the second comfort disappears. Others stay beside a man through years of stress, uncertainty, rebuilding, and struggle. And the difference usually has less to do with money itself, and more to do with emotional connection, values, maturity, and the kind of foundation the relationship was built on from day one. Some relationships are built almost entirely around lifestyle. The trips, the restaurants, the image, the comfort, the social status. And look, there's nothing wrong with enjoying those things. But if the relationship has no deeper emotional roots underneath all of it, pressure exposes that weakness fast. Meanwhile, other women become even more connected during difficult seasons because they admire resilience, loyalty, emotional honesty, and shared purpose. They're not blindly attracted to success alone. They're attracted to a man's ability to keep moving forward even after life humbles him. A wise older man once said, "Anybody can hold your hand while you're climbing. Pay attention to who still holds it while you're falling." That hits hard because adversity has a weird way of filtering people naturally. Some leave because they were attached to the lifestyle. Others stay because they were attached to the person. And for a lot of men, that realization becomes painful but necessary. Because once he sees who truly stayed loyal during his lowest moments, he starts understanding something that completely changes the standards he'll have for relationships moving forward. Topic 9. The men who become stronger after losing everything. There's a type of man life eventually tests in a brutal way. The kind who loses the money, the relationship, the status, the routine, sometimes all at once. And for a while, it feels like his entire identity got erased overnight. But strangely enough, some men come out of that season stronger than ever before. Not because the pain was easy, but because pain forced them to rebuild themselves from the inside out, instead of depending on outside validation anymore. A lot of powerful men were shaped during seasons nobody applauded. Long nights alone, empty bank accounts, rejection, embarrassment, starting over at an age where they thought they already had life figured out. And here's the crazy part. Many of those men later admit losing everything became the moment they finally saw themselves clearly. They started reading more, training harder, controlling emotions better, choosing friends more carefully, reconnecting with purpose, rebuilding discipline one small habit at a time. Sometimes rock bottom removes the distractions success was hiding. Think about how iron gets forged. Heat, pressure, repetition. Human beings aren't much different. Adversity either hardens bitterness or builds depth. And the men who truly transform after failure usually stop chasing approval completely. They stop trying to prove their worth to people who already walked away. Instead, they quietly rebuild their mind, body, finances, and emotional stability piece by piece. And eventually, something unexpected starts happening. They stop fearing loss the same way they used to, which completely changes the energy they carry into life and relationships afterward. Topic 10. Success changes people, but failure reveals them. Success has a way of covering cracks people don't notice. When money is flowing, confidence is high, and life feels comfortable. Almost everybody seems supportive, loving, optimistic, and loyal. It's easy to smile during the good times. Easy to believe a relationship is solid when nothing is really being tested. But failure changes the whole atmosphere. Suddenly, patience gets shorter. Tension rises. People react emotionally. And hidden parts of human nature quietly start revealing themselves under pressure. That's why difficult seasons often become the most honest chapters of a man's life. Because failure exposes not only the people around him, but also the parts of himself he spent years avoiding. Some men realize they were more emotionally dependent than they thought. Others notice they built their self-worth entirely around achievement and validation. And some finally confront uncomfortable fears they kept running from. Fear of rejection, fear of being ordinary, fear of not being respected without success attached to their name. Pressure has a strange way of forcing self-awareness. One businessman who lost millions during a market crash admitted something surprising afterward. He said the financial loss hurt less than realizing how many relationships disappeared the moment he stopped being useful to people. That experience changed the way he saw loyalty forever. And honestly, a lot of men eventually reach the same painful realization. Success attracts attention, but adversity reveals intentions. The people who stay during difficult seasons usually see something deeper than status. And once a man fully understands that difference, he starts valuing character, peace, and emotional maturity in a completely different way. Topic 11. The most attractive thing a man can build after rock bottom. After losing everything, a lot of men become obsessed with making money again as fast as possible. And honestly, that makes sense. Survival mode kicks in, pride kicks in. The pressure to get back on top becomes intense. But over time, some men discover something unexpected. The most powerful thing they rebuilt wasn't their bank account. It was their inner stability, their discipline, their emotional control, their ability to stay calm under pressure. Because once a man learns how to stand strong without needing outside validation, his entire presence changes. There's a certain energy people feel from a man who survived hard seasons and rebuilt himself honestly. He moves differently, talks differently. He no longer feels the need to impress everybody in the room because life already humbled him enough to show him what really matters. Ironically, this is often when many men become more attractive than they were during their peak financial success. Not because of status, but because grounded confidence feels completely different from ego. One is loud, the other is steady, and people naturally trust steadiness. A lot of younger guys chase looks, money, or social approval, believing those things alone create respect. But older, wiser men eventually realize that purpose is magnetic. Discipline is magnetic. Emotional resilience is magnetic. A man who can go through betrayal, failure, rejection, or financial collapse and still keep building his future without becoming bitter carries a kind of quiet strength money alone can never buy. And once he reaches that point emotionally, he starts seeing the whole story of who left and why they left through completely different eyes. Topic 12. What her leaving actually taught him. At first he thought losing her was the real tragedy. That was the part keeping him awake at night. The silence in the apartment, the empty side of the bed, the memories replaying in his head at 3 a.m. while staring at the ceiling. But as time passed, something unexpected started happening. The pain slowly stopped feeling like punishment and started feeling like revelation. Because distance has a strange way of showing people truths they couldn't see while emotionally drowning inside the situation. He started realizing that her leaving exposed things he had ignored for years. How much of his identity was tied to being needed. How often he sacrificed self-respect just to keep the peace. How deeply he feared failure, rejection, and emotional abandonment. And maybe most importantly, he realized he had spent years building external success while neglecting internal strength. That realization hurts, but it also becomes the beginning of real transformation. Because a man who finally sees himself clearly can't keep living unconsciously the same way anymore. One day he noticed something almost ironic. The man she left behind didn't even exist anymore. Not because he became cold or emotionless, but because suffering forced him to evolve. He became calmer, more disciplined, more intentional, less desperate for validation. He finally understood that real confidence isn't built when life goes perfectly. It's built when a man survives seasons that were supposed to destroy him. And weirdly enough, the chapter he once wanted to erase from his life completely became the exact story that rebuilt him from the ground up. Conclusion. Sometimes losing money reveals way more than just financial loss. It reveals who stays, who changes, who only respects you when life is easy. But more importantly, it reveals who you become when everything familiar disappears. A lot of men spend years chasing success without ever building themselves internally. Then one brutal season forces them to finally look in the mirror. So here's the real question. If everything around you collapsed tomorrow, who would you be without the status, the money, or the approval? Would you break, or would you rebuild stronger than before? Drop a comment below and be honest. Do you think she left because of the money? Or because something inside the relationship changed long before that? And if this video hit home for you in any way, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We're building a community for men who want clarity, strength, discipline, and emotional intelligence in a world that rarely teaches those things openly. And we're on the road to 1,000 subscribers. So join us and become part of the men who grow stronger through adversity instead of being destroyed by it.